Hello YouTube, this is Goddard Radio Moscow here again with another beer review. Now, as promised in my last video that I did on the Icelandic Einstök Pale Ale, I'm going to return to Canada for this one. So today I have for you the Moosehead Lager, which comes to you from the Moosehead Brewery in St. John's in New Brunswick in eastern Canada. Now, the only other Canadian beer review I've done so far is on the Sleeman Honey Lager, so I'll stick that in the description for you if you're interested in Canadian beer. But the next time I'll also see if I can do a West Coast Canadian beer, or one of the Western Province Canadian beers. Canadians, if you're watching, incidentally, please let me know some of your different beers that are worth checking out. We only have a very limited supply of them in Scotland. I've only ever seen Moosehead and Sleeman actually, so please let me know some different Canadian beers for me to check out. But anyway, as is usual with my videos, I'll just take you through the history of the Moosehead Brewery just now, but if you're simply interested in the tasting segment of the review, then feel free to fast forward just towards the last few minutes and you'll catch that particular segment of the video. But anyway, as I said earlier, the Moosehead Brewery are based in St. John, New Brunswick, and they're Canada's oldest and largest independent brewery. And their history goes back to 1867 when they were founded by Susanna Olland, and she'd sailed to Nova Scotia from England with her family in 1865. Now, upon her arrival, her and her husband John hired 9 employees and started up the brewery, which at that point was named the Army and Navy Brewery after their most loyal customers. Obviously the Army and Navy were big drinkers within Halifax. But John died very suddenly and unfortunately in 1870, and this forced Susanna to sell the brewery, although she was back in business 7 years later with her sons, forming the S. Olland and Sons Brewery. Now, by 1878, Susanna and her sons had actually seen the brewery burn down twice, but they say that these very early hardships that they had made their passion for brewing strong and made them determined to carry on. But in 1886, Susanna died, and then her sons John Jr., Conrad and George decided that they would rename the brewery the Maritime Brewing and Malting Company, and then they oversaw it into the next century. But in 1917, the brewery was actually destroyed in what became known as the Halifax Harbour explosion. And in this explosion, Conrad died and John was injured. But in 1918, the other brother, George Olland, he had packed up the brewery and set up a new one in New Brunswick along with his sons, and he'd used the insurance money that was given to them as a result of the destruction of the previous brewery to fund this one. But after a decade of success in this new brewery, George actually bought a second brewery in St. John, which is the brewery's current operating site. So they've been in their current brewery for a very long time. But in 1931 they launched the Moosehead Pale Ale, which is a very famous one. It's in a similar bottle to this one actually, but just with a red label, sometimes known as Moosehead Red. But this was followed in 1937 by the Alpine Lager, and this cemented the Olland family name in Canadian brewing history. Now, in 1947, they actually changed the name to the one that it has today, the Moosehead Breweries Limited, and this one is obviously the one that's become very famous. I understand this beer is very, very well known in Canada. But in 1962, the brewery welcomed in the 4th generation of the family to the running of the brewery. And in 1978, the company launched the Moosehead Lager in the USA after they'd been prohibited from further expanding within Canada. And I'm assuming this is due to some sort of competition commission that exists within Canadian government and things like that. I'm assuming it's something to do with that, but please correct me if I'm wrong. But in 1982, Derek Olland became the chief of the brewery, and he began to push the exports into the foreign markets. So this is probably why the very roots of why this came over here now. But in 1992, these trade barriers that I mentioned within Canada were lifted, and Moosehead started appearing within bars across the country. And correct me if I'm wrong again, but I'm sure that this beer is particularly widely available throughout Canada these days. But in the early 2000s, this actual beer, the Moosehead Lager, won an award at the prestigious Monde Select, which I believe is in Belgium, and it also won gold medals at the World Beer Cup and the Canadian Brewing Awards in 2003. Now, in 2006, Derek's sons, Andrew and Patrick, became the 6th generation of the Olland family to be involved with the brewery, and then Andrew took over the presidency in 2008. So as you can see, this is a brewery that has quite a nice story behind it. The family have always stuck with it through all these hardships, and it remains, as I said earlier, it's Canada's oldest and largest independent brewery, and you should always support the independent independent breweries. There's very few of them around these days. It tends to be all the kind of conglomerate companies and corporations that own a lot of the nice breweries. But anyway, now under the Moosehead name, the brewery also produced the Pale Ale, which, as I mentioned, has the red label earlier. They have there's Moosehead Light, Moosehead Light Lime, which is also in a green bottle like this one. There's Premium Dry and there's Dry Ice, and they also produce Alpine Lager, which is a slow aged beer with European hops. There's a light version of that one, Alpine Light. There's a Crack Canoe, which is a premium light beer, and there's also Clancy's Amber Ale, which is an English style ale. But without further ado, let's get on to the tasting of this beer. Now, I have to say, let's have a little look. I'll just bring the camera up again and let you have a little look at the artwork on this one. As you can see, very kind of what you would expect from the label. It says Moosehead Lager on it, and as it says, Canadian beer, 1867, the founding of the brewery. It's a 5% pale lager, and as it says here on the label, I'm not sure how well you can see that, but it says St. John, New Brunswick in Canada. For those of you interested in the bottle cap, there you are. It's quite a nice bottle cap on this one, I have to admit. The only downside I would say to this bottle is the fact that it's a green one rather than a brown one, which obviously leaves a little bit, can lead to a little bit of oxidation damage of the beer, but hopefully there's none of that. But as I said, this one is a 5% pale lager. But anyway, let's get this guy out and just get on with the tasting of this one. I've had this before, as I said. I've had the pale ale and this one, so I'm interested to actually do this now that I've got a better taste for beer than I had when I had them before. But as you can see, typical lager colour, a very kind of pale golden one. Swirl the last little bit around, get some head on this. There we are. Let's let all the rest of the bubbles out. Anyway. Okay, there we go. Right, so as you can see, there's a very, very sort of thin, white, bubbly head on top of this. It's a typical lager colour. There's not so much in the way of bubbles on this one. I was expecting a bit more with it being a lager. I'd heard this one, I remember this one actually being quite fizzy when I tried it before. But there's some bubbles visible there. The head's kind of dissipating. It just has a little tiny bit of retention, but starting to dissipate a bit more quickly now. Crystal clear, pale golden lager. It's typical of that. In terms of the aroma, it's got just a little hint of a skunky smell, and as I say, that's probably due to the green bottle rather than a brown bottle. But there's some sweet malts in there, some faint hint of grain. There's a little bit of sort of floral, grassy hops, a little bit, I would say. It actually has a little bit of corn to it as well. I think there is some corn in there. But anyway, let's give it a taste and see. Yeah, there's a good bit of corn in the start of that one. But it's a fairly sweet tasting beer. The grainy malts kind of come up front, and then there's the sweetness, that little corn element in the middle, and that kind of lingers towards the end. It's actually got quite a dry feel to it, I would say. I am picking up the sort of grassy and floral notes that I mentioned in the aroma. Wash it about a little bit. Yeah, it is kind of a little bit malty on the finish. In terms of the mouth, it's very, very light actually. It's actually got quite a dry feel to it, this beer, I would say. But it's very, very easy drinking, and it's quite crisp as well. The carbonation on it's actually quite zippy. You feel it on the tongue, but there really isn't so much present. It actually has that kind of sort of spritzy, zippy feel to the mouth, I would say. But yeah, like I say, it's very easy drinking. The taste that comes up, you get the grainy sort of malts up front. There's some sweetness from the corn in the middle, and there is that little hint of hoppy, floral, grassy hops in there as well. And the sort of corny sweetness lingers on the end. Very, very wet mouthfeel, I would say. Crisp and easy drinking. I have to say, this one, within the style of being a lager, is actually it's actually quite nice within that, I would say. Lagers, obviously, you don't expect so much taste from. It's more the sort of ales and things that you're expecting more citrusy taste from and stuff. But in terms of the style, I would say this is a very good beer. From memory, I would say that if you have the choice between this and the Pale Ale, I would always pick the Pale Ale over this one. The Moosehead Red, or the Moosehead Pale Ale, however you want to name it, is a very, very nice beer in memory. So I would say pick that over this. But this is worth a try. You can get it fairly cheaply. Definitely give it a try, I would say. And as I say, it's from Canada's oldest and largest independent brewery. So you should always support the independent breweries as far as you can, I would say. But anyway, thanks for watching my beer reviews. I'll be back tomorrow. I think tomorrow I'll be doing an Australian beer. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider it. I hope you've found the beer reviews informative. If you've tried this one, let me know what you think of it yourself. Canadians, if you're watching, please recommend me some more Canadian breweries to check out. I'm always willing to try new beer, and also with that, if you can recommend me some places that I can maybe use to import them as well, that would be much appreciated. But please, as usual, like, subscribe, share the videos. Thanks for your support so far, and you've been watching Goddard Radio Moscow. I'll catch you soon. Cheers.